Well, hello everyone.
Hello, Colin.
Hi.
Hello everyone. It's great to see you all here. I'm Colin Marks. I'm a lecturer at the DPU, and it's my great pleasure to be chairing this session, celebrating Jeff's book. And we're just starting. Welcome.
Hello.
It's really, I think I have the easiest job here in terms of the celebration that we're having today. I think Ruth and Billy are going to make some comments about the book, and Jeff's going to tell us a little bit about the background to the book as we go on. But I think one thing I've noticed having read through the book is just how some of the questions that Jeff has been asking, often since the 70s, are still the same questions. And it's really nice to see how you were returning to those with some new solutions. So that's been fantastic. And I do recommend the book to anybody who would like to get a copy. Jeff has some copies, which he can make available at the end. So let me introduce the panelists. Let's start with Jeff. I mean, I think most people will know Jeff. He's been around a long time, and has been part of the DPU as amongst many other things. He's been working in many different countries, as the book attests, and he's drawn on that rich experience to record it and share it with us. Ruth, I think we probably have I was thinking, well, how many decades of experience we have on this panel? Both Ruth and Billy have been around probably almost as long as Jeff. Jeff, you win. So Ruth has been involved in housing and land issues for a long time as well. She set up Homeless International, amongst her many other achievements, and is also working at the DPU at the moment for her sins. And Billy was I must tell you, Billy was the only one who complied with my request for a bio. Thank you, Billy. These two here were a bit renegade. But many of you will know Billy. And I would like to pull out...
Did you get mine?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
You're in the renegade category. Billy's career started in South Africa, working in NGOs, and from there he went into very exciting positions with the post-apartheid government, and from there, many of you will know, he moved into Cities Alliance with various other things along the way, and for many years guided Cities Alliance through its many achievements, and has recently retired, apparently, although according to Mary, his wife, that's not true.
He's just got married.
He's just said over. Yeah. So both Ruth and Billy will offer some comments on the book, and we're going to start with Jeff giving a bit of background to the book, and then at the end, after Ruth and Billy's comments, we'll have some time for questions and answers and discussion. So Jeff, over to you.
Thanks very much, and nice to see many familiar faces and some new ones. And it's always great after the lockdowns and everything to be able to meet in person as opposed to online. I decided to write this book because there was a lull in consultancy, and I thought this is a good chance to reflect, take stock, and maybe pass on what I've learned as well as I can to those following. And when I was doing the final editing for the book, which I have to say almost wrote itself because I was so into it at the time, I was doing the final editing, and my grandson, who was 5 at the time, he was 6 on Saturday, came in and said, "What are you doing, Grandad?" And I said, "Grandad's writing a book." And he showed polite interest. And I said, to try and make him interested, I said, "And do you know what, Nico? Grandad's dedicating this book to you and your brother." And he said, "You don't need to do that, Grandad. We've got lots of books in school." So I thought, well, maybe I'm not going to have it stocked in the primary school library, but it is at least dedicated to them, because we are facing an existential crisis at the moment. I think we all agree that the climate crisis, the political crisis, the economic crisis cannot be denied by anybody, whatever their perspective or ideology. And I was interested to see that on the first day of Davos, last Monday, a week ago today, Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, one of the most conservative, one might say sometimes reactionary institutions in the world in terms of finance, was talking to the Davos audience about a confluence of calamities. And if that isn't a wake-up call, if the IMF isn't the yardstick by which a recognition of the crisis we face isn't measured, I don't know what is. It's reached that far into the system. Now, I've dedicated the book to their generation because I think our generation, I would argue, and I hesitate to include both of you because you're a bit younger than me, but I do feel that my generation, especially born in the global north, could well in 200 years be regarded as the luckiest generation in the whole of human history. We've had free education, full employment, good secure employment, good pensions, no wars to fight, good health, and rock and roll. And that combination of all that security is an amazing thing which the younger generation don't have. I was talking to Martina here the other day and other people, and the amount of time that young academics have to spend to get their job renewed, let alone improved or enhanced or made more secure, and the same in every other sector, is absolutely abysmal. My postman, I saw him unlocking the postbox the other day. He's now collecting mail as well as delivering it, and they've changed the routes so they have to deliver more within their budget, within their time frame. So we're now talking about a crisis on all fronts, and my argument and all the evidence shows that land and housing is a physical manifestation of this crisis. But I don't want to be negative because there's no point in just passing on doom to the next generation. What I think is that if something is part of a problem, it can be and should be part of a solution. So what I did when I was writing the book was to say, well, what are the factors that influence us when we're looking at these issues about land and housing? And I go back to the people that influenced me. Amos Rappaport I was meeting once, and he asked me, what was the last big idea that influenced me in my field? And I thought back, and it didn't take long to think, well, it was John Turner and his fellow activists, as they were then, and observers. John Turner, Lisa Peattie, Bill Mangin, Charles Abrams. They were saying that the problem that the conventional theories regarded as a problem was in fact part of the solution. And I'm talking about squatter housings, community-led housing, demand-based housing policy and land development. And it showed quite clearly all the evidence. And a film was made by John in the 1960s, which was updated just very recently, which I was proud to be associated with, which went back to the area in Lima, to the area which he had recorded, and they made another film with the grandsons and granddaughters of the original invaders to see what lessons could be learned. And that, to me, was a very, very important example that something that's part of a problem can be part of a solution. The people generally are capable of planning cities, not just housing projects. And the other major influence, which was a very, very fortunate one for me, was Paul Oliver. Because after I qualified as an architect, well, before I qualified, I was very, very interested in cultural aspects of architecture and housing and the environment. I was very bad at technology, anything related to that. So I never put a building up, otherwise it would probably have fallen down. But when I was very keen, I wanted to go to Japan to see how they looked at and perceived and used space. The concept of ma, meaning a sense of place, was one of the really interesting things for me that I learned. And of course the metabolists at that time reinterpreted traditional Japanese architecture, which has form, substance, but like any organism, is complete at any one point, but capable of adaptation and evolution. So you don't have symmetry in Japanese architecture. And all these influences, I found when I came back from India after I'd done my initial research as a scholar there, and there was a very good professor there who was talking about what we need isn't architects and planners and engineers. We need the first year should be as a habitect, you know, where you actually learn the basics of how economics relate to culture, relate to social needs, relate to economics, relate to politics and institution building. All these things need to be seen as part of a holistic process. And when I came back from India, Paul invited me to give a lecture at the AA School of Architecture. And after I'd given the lecture, he said, we don't have anyone teaching this. Would you like a job? So that's how I started as an academic, purely fortuitously. Would any graduate expect to get that opportunity now? Of course not. I was very, very lucky. And after I'd done that, I wanted to take my students to an urbanizing country. We couldn't afford to fly. The director let me buy a Volkswagen minibus, and we drove the students to Ankara. Istanbul was too attractive, and I'd lose the students. So we went to Ankara, we did the studies there, and sold it for a profit when we got back. So that experience of how the poor use land was just amazing to me. I have never, ever seen a square centimetre of land wasted when it's planned and organised by the people themselves. I've seen lots of it wasted by professionals wanting to do the right thing. And it made me realise very, very quickly that the real professionals in terms of housing and planning are the poor themselves. We should regard ourselves as the students, and we should be learning how they organise it. So those were the influences that got me thinking about all of these things. These were the values that I tried to bring when I was writing the book and reflecting on what I wanted to pass on. So I organised the book in 3 parts. Part 1 is a statement of the challenge. I prefer the word challenge to problem, because problem implies something negative. Challenge is hopefully something you rise to. And I was very, very fortunate after I'd done the research to get an invitation from David Allen, who's very kindly joined us here, who's head of Colton Planning, to go and work with Forbes Davidson in Ismailia, Egypt. And there I learned so much also about the incremental self-financing process of informal housing, semi-formal housing, and how there's a wide range of tenure categories. So we don't have black or white. You've got 50 shades of grey, you could say. We've got a whole range of land tenure. And I was invited by the World Bank to do a review of the literature on land tenure. And I said, look, I'm not an expert. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an economist. But I had done a review of the literature on informal settlements, and they wanted someone who could write in a clear way, which was what they said I could do. What was interesting, having done that paper, this was intended as a contribution to the bank's 1993 housing sector paper. They totally rejected my draft and the revised draft, but they would never point out anything particularly that was wrong. They said I could publish separately, but not as part of the World Bank. When I saw what they had published, the title alone gave it away. The title was Housing, Enabling Markets to Work. Not people, not communities, enabling markets. And the bank at that time was totally into the neoliberal way of thinking, structural adjustment, land titling, and then later on, of course, Fernando de Soto published his book, The Mystery of Capital. The subtitle, The Triumph of Capitalism and Why It Fails Everywhere Else. You know, this was triumphalism in the 1990s. And all of that ethos was based on the work of the neoliberal theologians, you might say, theorists, theologians, von Moses, von Hayek, and Milton Friedman, and their disciple, I would argue, Fernando de Soto. So all of this theoretical construct was what they used to create think tanks to capture the political agenda. Reagan and Thatcher liked what they heard. Basically, Fernando de Soto was telling the Washington consensus what they wanted to hear. That there is a simple solution to a complex problem. As long as you've got a photocopier and you can print title documents and give them to the poor From then on, if they don't succeed by leveraging a loan, starting a business and lifting themselves out of poverty, it's their fault, not the ministers, not the governments. And that made me so angry. I wrote a paper, Alan and I were challenging the assumptions and claims of De Soto. Did a project in many countries with local people that I know, and presented this at the World Bank in, I think, 2004, which was a chance to get that off my chest and say what I felt was needed on land tenure. And I was very surprised, and pleasantly surprised, by a senior official, John Bruce, coming up afterwards and saying he realised that the bank had put too many eggs in the omelette, was the phrase he used, and would I like to come for lunch? And it was after that that I started collaborating with the World Bank, and very interesting projects. Not all of them succeeded, of course, but it was a very interesting evolution of policy. So part one of the book is looking at land tenure security, inequality, the climate crisis, and the way that elitism has influenced urban planning. So I look at the role of professionals changing to serve the new elite, political elite, such as the new capital of Cairo, Diamniadio in Senegal, and various other places, Naum in Saudi Arabia, which are all very elitist visions of the future, like Dubai, if you like. And these concepts are providing the opportunities for professionals, much more than the sort of things that I think are needed. So part one is really looking at the challenge. Part two then goes into a whole number of case studies where I've either directed research or been a consultant, or some cases both. And what I find interesting when I was trying to sort of see what was the link to the case studies in terms of the broad theory was that the countries were coming towards market-based economics from very different origins. They were in transition, if you like, from either state control, take China, you take Ethiopia, you take Cuba, or from customary systems like Vanuatu, Lesotho, Solomon Islands, where the customary system of land meant that you valued it according to its social and environmental tradition, and you inherited it, you cared for it, and you passed it on to the next generation. And in Vanuatu, I was walking between houses in a village, and I was walking over graves. And people, you know, I was very embarrassed and apologized. No, the dead are with us. They're still part of the community. And there's that sense of continuity that you don't get in the West under the neoliberal system, where this is my land, it's mine to do what I like with, and I can sell it and dispose of it as I wish. So, you know, looking at the case studies was an interesting opportunity to see how the different arguments you might need in different countries if you want to advance a progressive idea. So I remember in Ethiopia, to give a quick example, where the state says that if the urban areas are expanding, they want a piece of land, the land is all owned by the people, in other words, the government decides, and if a farmer has built a house and grown some crop, they will compensate him for that, or her, and then move him 20 kilometers away with the compensation to start farming again. And there were mass protests, but the government was immune to all the protests. And so I was talking to this official, and I thought, well, there's no point in complaining about it, because that won't get me anywhere. So I said, could we play a game? Could you imagine that I'm the government and you're a farmer, and I want your land and I tell you to move 20 kilometers away, and your parents and your grandparents and great-grandparents are all buried in the village church yard? Would you be happy? And I could see the guy's brain changing gear. He'd never thought of land as a personal, communal experience, part of who you are. And he said, you had to say, no, I wouldn't be happy. So I could then say, right, well, if I could find an option that would enable you to stay where you are and I can develop the land, would you be interested? And he said, yes. So we were able to start talking about land pooling, land readjustment. So in other words, I think it's, because countries are coming from different directions towards a standard, if you like, market-based approach, the approaches that one uses as a consultant needs to adapt to the local context that you're working in. So that was part 2. And then it comes to part 3. And I was thinking, how can one bring all of this together in a way which enables us to find a way forward as a solution to these challenges? And so I started asking myself a very basic question. What do we mean by development? And how can we measure progress towards it? And it took me back to a paper I'd written in 1979 called Third World Solutions to First World Problems. And what I found in Turkey was that because of a pragmatic response by the government, people had basically been able to move into the city of Ankara, find a plot of land in areas where their neighbors had settled from their village, build a house and get a job and establish themselves. And so I thought, well, if you define development, not by how much money you've got, but by how much control you have over your life, then in housing terms, low-income groups in Ankara had more control over their lives than middle-income people in my own country, the UK, which made me think that development is more, more different to the way we define it now. And so I was very struck by a whole number of people. Wilkinson and Pickett, the spirit level book, writing about equality is good for everybody. And they were medical researchers and came up with all sorts of social negatives resulting from inequality. And they did it over time, all OECD countries. And then I was very impressed by Michael Sandel's book, The Tyranny of Merit, which is used, merit is used as a justification by the established rich to how they got where they are. And in fact, of course, he admits that most of the students who do well in Harvard are coming from privileged backgrounds. So you're not starting from an equal level point in the whole process of development. So in chapter 13, at the beginning of beginning of part 3, I try to, as a personal exploration, say what I think development is, and then how do we achieve it. And so I'll end the presentation by saying that one of the ways that I think that we need, in order to address inequality and the climate crisis, is that the central argument, the best illustration of it I can find, is by Kate Raworth and her Donut Economics Action Lab in Oxford. And that's a woman who worked for Oxfam, worked for the World Bank, went to Oxford University, and is now a professor there, doing brilliant things and showing how the donuts, if you like, the ring. She's great because she makes it a joke. She makes it something everyone can understand. The donut is a ring within which we should all be living in a sustainable, socially and economically environmental way. And inside the donut, inside that ring, are the underprivileged, under-resourced, deprived, vulnerable groups who need to be leveled up, if you like, into the donut. And it's those groups, in the global north particularly, who are consuming far more than they should, polluting the planet, causing the problem, consuming far more than they should. I think an average Californian consumes 240 times more than an average Nepalese or Malian. This is gross excess. They need to level down, not level everyone up to the Californian standard. So, when you're looking at that, they are now being picked up by a number of cities, Amsterdam, Rotterdam in particular. Forbes knows all about that, so I can speak later if needed. But, this is now developing a practical focus to transfer broad concepts and ideas into practical workable programs. And obviously one of the big things that we need to address is inequality, not just in terms of incomes. The Gini coefficient focuses on income distribution, which is bad enough. The real inequality is in wealth distribution. And that is reflected in land and property. I think I read somewhere that the global worth of real estate is 4 times global GDP. It's about $380 trillion. So we're looking at land and property as a key element that needs to be central to any reform and change. The state, as Mariana Mazzucato here at UCL has been demonstrating, is in a potentially very powerful position to maximize public benefit from private investment. And there's been very good examples whereby this, I did a report last year for UN Habitat, which was supposed to be on land-based finance for affordable housing. And I thought, well, that's looking at the whole thing through the financial prism. And adequate is much broader concept than affordable. So I ended up broadening the brief dramatically, and we ended up with a report, The Role of Land in Achieving Adequate and Affordable Housing. And so that element of it is also in the book. I've updated it and focused that for the book. Spatial planning has a massive role in putting land to efficient use, learning from the way the poor use land, diversifying land and supply options, whether it's a state or a market system. If there's a limited supply number of options, those in charge of supply have the opportunity to control and not respond to changes in demand or future needs. So I would argue that community-led non-market options are vital if we are to escape the tyranny of the market economics. And the final thing, I think, which is absolutely vital for success, is local leadership. If you look at the places that have succeeded, and I think of the medium-sized town in Indonesia, of Solo. The mayor of Solo did very, very well and was made the governor of Jakarta. He did well enough in Jakarta to now become the president of the country. He's not solved all the problems, but it shows what local leadership can achieve. The mayor of Tirana in Albania was elected after the end of the communist regime. He was an artist, he has no money. He painted all the grey concrete buildings a riot of colours. If you Google Tirana colours, you'll see that. People felt proud to be living in the place. Revenues went up. He's now the Prime Minister of the country. If you look at Medellin, the most dangerous city in the world, Comuna 13, the most dangerous part of the most dangerous city in the world, in 10 years is now a tourist attraction. And people who were dealing with drugs are now rappers or engaged in environmental community initiatives. So in other words, with local leadership, and Chile, I think, is interesting. Here's a student leader, now was 35 when he was elected, he's only 36. He's made one of the authors of the IPCC report on the climate his Minister for Climate Change. He's 36, he's naive to politics. The vested interest groups will close in if he doesn't come up with policies soon. This is where we professional communities need to be fully equipped with policies in our medical bag, if you like, ready to fire off effective, realistic, pragmatic, positive policies for change as soon as a window of opportunity arises. I often have students in the past that are going to go back home to countries where the chances in the short term are minimal if they exist at all. But I would say be positive, be optimistic. You can have a chance in the future. If an opportunity arises, if there's a new government that comes in, grab it with both hands and have a policy ready to pounce. So there's, I believe, and Australia, a new government. So, new political leadership, pragmatic ideas, professional community with ideas ready to act is what I think we have to build on, and there's everything to play for. And before I finish, I'll just say that I was presenting all of this to a friend, Humphrey Hawksley, and he said, "Well done, Jeff, you've done your book, what's the sequel?" And I said, "Well, it's quite enough doing all this, what more on earth do you expect?" He said, "Well, I've already got the title for your next book, Somewhere to Land. I'm a glider pilot." And he said, "You always need somewhere to land, and we all need somewhere to land anyway, so why not write that?" So I'm going to start that maybe tomorrow. Thank you very much.